everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 4 of Vinland Saga Season 2. And yeah, my my persona that has been dubbed by the Discord Romania Mac, I hope didn't scare everybody away. But yeah, we're on the new episode of the week, and we've met Snake, which everybody seems to like, so I have high expectations of Snake, although I can't really base anything off of that because there have been characters in shows that I've had other people in the Discord and on Patreon and YouTube be like, oh, they're my favorite character, and I've not liked them. And then I've had characters that I personally like that everybody else has been like, oh, they're garbage, and I'm like, well, you know, sometimes you just want a trash king, right? Sometimes you just feel like it, so... But it is actually really cold outside, so I have bundled up inside my home. It's chilly, it's sleeting, it feels very much like the winter that Thorfinn escaped at the start of season 1. So we'll see, right? But I do have a couple comments before we start this new episode. One is from Anita Meyer. Anita Meyer made a really good point in the last episode that Einar, before Thorfinn had his ear chopped off, noticed Thorfinn's mental and emotional state. Noticing that he's going through some depressing, tough times. And Einar seemed to have not realized that until this moment. Which kind of makes sense because, you know, Einar might have just thought that was just Thorfinn's personality. He's just a quiet guy. But no, we the audience know that he's going through it and he's like dead inside, and Einar is slowly catching up to speed with the audience about the situation. But there's also a really cool parallel that Anita pointed out between Thorfinn and Fox and their conversation, and then Thorkel and Knut back from season 1. And the idea of, you know, going against something the other is saying. Like Thorkel and Knut were kind of at odds with their words, and then Thorfinn and Fox are at odds with their words in this last episode. So I thought that was pretty neat. Evil Communist Pickle Rick pointed out that they're not sure if Einar is referring to the Danes or England in terms of beasts in human skin, but the saying alone reminded Thorfinn of Askeladd, who thought the same of both. And honestly, yeah, both, the same is true for both, right? You could say that humanity is beasts in, you know, human skin, right? Trying to disguise itself as something that it's not, right? So that's rather interesting. And then finally, Alexander Q talks about, Alexander Q and I had an interesting conversation about Kettle. We kind of agree and disagree on different parts of Kettle's personality. I'm trying to give Kettle the benefit of the doubt, but I've read enough narratives about indentured servants and slavery growing up that I'm like, even though he's nice, like I told Alexandra, I was like, things could be a lot worse. It's still indentured servitude. It's still a form of slavery. He's gonna still make money off of them. He's not just gonna be like, otherwise, if that weren't the case, he would just let them free and say, oh, well, if you want to work for me, you can, if you got nowhere else to go, but otherwise you're free to go. But that's not the case. He wants to get something out of this relationship. Now, granted, I'll give Kettle a little bit of devil's advocate benefit that he is working with the people in the fields to harvest the wheat. He is a nice man, it seems. But Alexander Q brought up a great point, that Kettle seems to be trying to influence the community that he is leading. He's trying to make the people be more open-minded and kinder to the people that are indentured servants. But as we've seen, it's hard to control humans and it's hard to change their modes of thinking. And for Kettle, that is very true. Even his own son, he's tried to like make more open-minded, and Olmar's just not having it. Maybe after this whole saga he will, who knows? But it's interesting to note that Kettle tries to take control of the situation and control how people think, and that's just not possible. Because like Fox and Badger, the others that are treating the slaves horribly, it's just definitely not a thing that Kettle is in control of like he thinks he might be. So I thought that was really interesting. And also Alexander Q pointed out that Einar probably lost his dad around the same time that Thorfinn did, and that made me cry. So, or at least tear up just a wee bit, right? So yeah. I'm pretty excited, y'all, to see what we're going to get this episode. The good thing about watching this week to week with you all, and the good thing about you all not spoiling me if you've read the manga, is I have no clue. I have no earthly clue where this could go. Because, yeah, either Snake is going to be okay and actually be fine, but he's the leader of them, so he strikes me as being like deep down he's good, but on the surface he's not going to go easy on anybody. That's my impression. His name is literally Snake, and the question is he a black snake or is he a viper? Because black snakes look really intimidating, but they actually do a job in killing rats. So black snakes are actually helpful. They're actually a good kind of snake you want to have, not like a rattlesnake or a copperhead or something like that. So we'll see, won't we? But in any case, I hope y'all are excited. I very much am too. So we are going to open this up here and see what we get, shall we? All right, so we are going to start Vinland Saga episode 4 of season 2, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. A wild asser appears. That's who it was. I had to stop the reaction and be like, okay, I need to know who it was. And it was way back in episode 13 of season 1 when Askeladd and they were going to Wales and they did the Treaty of Non-Aggression. It's Asser. It's Asser. The guy that looks like Erwin Smith. For a second I was like, is this Harold? But no, it is actually him. So, and he had like the little band around his forehead, which is probably something that's Welsh. So curious that they're there, that they're making a stop here, or we don't know exactly where that is, right? We'll go back to the episode. We don't know exactly where that's taking place, but so Asser's around. Interesting. Okay. I feel as if a lot of people, when they watch this episode, are either going to think one of two things. They are either going to be like, there was no action in this episode, and it was just like two bros sitting in a cabin, sitting in a hay loft talking to each other, and they're not going to think it's a very good episode. Or they're going to think it's just like a boring episode. Or they're going to be like me and feel like this was a tug your heart out of your soul and body and stomp on it into the ground episode, because that's essentially what it was. I loved this episode. I am a huge person about character development, about character work, and you did everything show that you needed to do in this episode. The episode's called Awakening, and that's exactly what it was. But it was not the awakening like I thought it was going to be. When we hear the episode title and you think Awakening, I'm sure a lot of people are like, it was Snake, and he was so badass and got Thorfinn to like waken his inner monster. No, what it was that Einar and Snake, by proxy, we'll talk about Snake, but it was Einar getting him to realize that, yeah, his life is worth living, and that he does have a reason to live. And as Einar says, it's because someone sacrificed their life to keep you alive. So don't take that for granted, and don't be spoiled and arrogant. And that's what Thorfinn's needed to hear. So between Snake and Einar, it was like that's exactly what he needed to hear to wake up. To be like, to get out of his funk. And it's not like awakening his inner feral monster, which could have inadvertently come out, It did for Snake. We'll talk about that. But it's mainly that he got out of this depressing funk to realize, yeah, I do want to live. I don't want to die. My body not only doesn't want to die, but mentally, no, there's a reason I'm here. I don't know what yet. That's Thorfinn's biggest problem, is that Thorfinn needs a purpose, and he doesn't know why he's here. But Askeladd's words coming back and being like, no, you need to keep going, move forward, keep living, don't be drugged down by your past revenge-seekingness with me. So, yeah, this was a great episode. And Einar and Snake awakening Thorfinn from his funk and getting him to realize that, yeah, you do have a reason of being here. You may not know exactly what it is yet. You may not know your purpose. We gotta find that. But you do have a reason to be here on this planet, and you should not take that for granted, right? But man, oh my gosh, there was one weird animation aspect about this episode, and that was that Mappa focused on people's mouths to an unhealthy degree. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one that noticed this, and maybe it's something present in the manga. Could very well be. I mean, mouths play an important symbolic role. They signify the things that we say. They signify breathing, which is life itself. So if you're trying to tie the mouths to a metaphor, being like, they kept showing us mouths to be like the things we say, how they impact others, the fact that we're breathing, and that means that we're alive. Like, if they were focusing on the mouths to show that symbolic representation, I get it. It's just the way Mappa animates mouths, especially on these men stuck in like medieval times. They're all chapped lips and like stubble. I wanted to like give them a razor and some Carmex and be like, can we get some gloss on that shit? think of like Victor and Yuri on Ice, where he's like putting the lip gloss over Yuri's lips. I just need to take a smudge of that and give it on Thorfinn and Einar. Can we do that, please? Oh, but yeah. So we need to go through this episode. Talk about real quick. So we get the recap of Thorfinn. Again, it's so bizarre seeing him older. Like, I'm so used to seeing younger Thorfinn. And now we see old Snake. Old Snake. We'll get past this part here. So basically, Snake is in charge of all of them. Understand why. He's kind of the strongest guy there. But him and Thorfinn, I did not make the connection to Askeladd until this episode. But there is an aspect of Snake that is kind of similar to Askeladd. And the funny thing is, in all of the previous in season 1, anytime we had Askeladd in the OP, or anytime I've seen artwork of him, there's been like a snake tied to Askeladd metaphorically, or a dragon, which is kind of like a lizard. So there's been that vibe with Askeladd. There's a sword and the snake on the sword. When we saw the OP for season 1, and Askeladd had the crown and stuff, the sword had a snake on it, and that was the emblem of Askeladd. Snake is the embodiment of that. So I like he has like this roux and the sausage all cut up, and he's just sitting there calling them bacas. I love he just sits there and just calling bacas. He's a very handsome character, this old Snake. He's very handsome. He has the pretty green, the teal turquoise eyes, and he's got the bread and stuff. And he's just like, you made me get out of my home and walk all the way here to find out you guys are just philandering around like a bunch of morons. The least you can do is get me some ale and some bread and some meat. I do like that they just bandaged Fox's nose up. It looks ridiculous. And Badger's just sitting here like prostrating himself, and Olmar looks like his tail's between his legs. And then this one guy is stuck bandaging up Thorfinn, who's just letting them do it like nothing's the big deal. And then Einar is like, what the hell's going on? But yeah, Snake, I like just the idea that Snake's like, really? This guy got cheeky and that's why you're being a bunch of morons? Really? That's the whole thing? And him going up to Thorfinn, trying to figure out what's his deal. What is his deal? And he heard Thorfinn say that he had no point in living. That he was like, he just wanted to die, right? So he heard that whole conversation. I like when he walks up to Thorfinn and he has a little, like, the tiny smile. He's like, those guys are idiots. Hi, I'm Snake. Like, let's be friends, right? But he's really trying to just feel the situation out. He's trying to feel Thorfinn out and see, okay, what am I going to do about this guy? And then, like, in an instant, he changes. Like, his eyes change in an instant. And he's like, okay, I'm going to fight you now. And Thorfinn, in that moment, saw that change and saw Askeladd coming at him. It was the same vibe, same atmosphere. And yeah, now that you see it in action, Snake is a lot like Askeladd. He's very imposing. They're all scared of him. They think he's the strongest. They rely upon him, but he's their leader and they follow him and do whatever he says. It reads very similar to Askeladd from season 1, and I can't believe I didn't notice it last. But then again, even then, him being lazy at the old man's farm in the last episode is not too unlike when Askeladd was at his uncle's place and was just kind of gallivanting around. It's the same vibe. Interesting. And he's so calm as he gets like Thorfinn hit him. Now the thing about Thorfinn is, I feel Thorfinn's got like some bulk on him now and some age on him now. He's not a kid. That if he was using the same moves he was using as like a 14-year-old, he'd be pretty formidable. He'd be pretty tough. He's been sitting there getting abs chopping wood nonstop. I think he'd be a big problem for anybody to face. And he still is pretty agile even when he's missing part of an ear and has been bleeding nonstop. Yeah, and just in that one move, Thorfinn was on edge. Like it was almost instinct. It was like it's been ingrained into his body, this reflex reaction to someone coming at him, that he does the moves. And for once, for the first time in this entire season, Thorfinn has looked like himself. Only older, so it's a little bit different. And then Snake's like, okay. I like his snake sword is also kind of curved. The blade's curved a little bit. Kind of fits that snake motif. And Olmar's like, what the hell, man? And they're all like, who'd we just face? And Einar can't believe it either. And Snake's like, okay, Like Snake's just confirming what he thought. But I like the impression that, yeah, if Thorfinn had been giving 10%, effort, he probably would have been able to take Fox and the other guys. But he just hadn't been giving any at all. So, but yeah, man, Snake, just looking there all handsome like a damn Calvin Klein model. And then him smiling. And again, when they cut back to Thorfinn has that like, look on his face, but he's older. So it's really funny. I want to get a picture of that. It's just, I love that we see for the first time Thorfinn look like himself, but as an adult. It's actually wonderful. I love that expression. I love seeing him. And then he's like, oh, it's fine. See? And he says, see that? Your body says that it wants to live. So I like that Snake and Einar in this episode come at Thorfinn from two different angles. Snake is saying, your body is not ready to die. Like, you can sit there and have people stab you, but your body doesn't want to die. So quit betraying it, right? Quit standing there doing nothing when your body clearly still has a lot of fight left in it, right? So Snake is coming at it from the physical standpoint, being like, you've not given up, your body's not broken down, quit acting like an old man, come on, you got this, and giving him his version of a pep talk, basically. And Thorfinn seems so surprised. Like, this is the first time since Askeladd that someone's told him to live. That to keep going. Like, that's probably the first time he's heard it since Askeladd died. And I love Snake being like, was I right? Was I right? This like dark-haired Fabio over here. And then he just instantly goes back to being bored. Like, he has like 30 seconds of energy. And he's like, okay, I'm done, guys. All right. Playtime's over. Did my moral duty of the day. Gave all the lectures that I can fit. Now it's time for me to go back to sleep. And then, but he tells them, he's like, I'm going to go. But if I ever hear that y'all are messing around with these two again, he's like, if I have to tell you, one thing I love that Mappa does in this moment is the way that they make it get so dark in that split second where he turns around. The day you cause any more trouble over this matter, he's like, I'll make sure that you won't be able to chew your own food anymore. Yeah, I love that sickly purple tone. And they're all like, oh, no worries, we're not going to do any of that again. And then again, I love the focus on Thorfinn's hand, where he sees all the cuts and scrapes in it and like makes the fist like do I still, so my body does still want to live. Like, it's almost like he didn't believe it himself until Snake tested it, right? To see that, no, he's still good. And Einar just being like, hey, you okay, old buddy, old pal? And he says, do I want to live? And Einar's like, Einar gets a little grumpy face in that moment when Thorfinn's like, do I want to live? And Einar's like, baka. Like, that's just what his face is like, come on now. And then Thorfinn asks the big question. He's like, live? For what? Like, why and do what? What do I do? That is the big question. And I love that Thorfinn's getting there. He's getting to the point where he's thinking about it. Like, no, because Askeladd told him, you got to move forward. You got to move on past this revenge to find something else to do with your life. And Thorfinn's problem is the only thing he's known his entire life has been bloodshed and violence and killing. And he just got burnt out and tired of it. But when you don't know what else to do, it's so easy to fall into that depression when you just don't know what else to do with your life. It's like, he's like, well, I don't know where to go. He's like, I've had this one job my whole life, and then I realized this job wasn't feasible anymore, but I have no plan B. So what do I do? And God, it's just, I love that also in the OP as well. Now that we see all the hands like reaching out and grabbing over and over again, now when he wakes up in the middle of the night and has his hand up in the air, like when he's screaming and having the night terrors, and Einar's hand grabs him, that's reminiscent of that too from the OP now. I'm like, oh, I love it. So yeah, God, it's so interesting. And then we cut back to Pater. Now Pater's interesting, right? Pater making note, giving him the medicine. And Pater makes note that he's been placed in charge of watching over Thorfinn and Einar and making sure they get well adjusted, which has gone well so far. But yeah, I find that interesting because Pater's supposed to be a free man, right? So Why? I know I'm flogging a dead horse about Kettle, but I do find it interesting that Pater's supposed to be free, but he's been placed in charge of these two. I guess that's probably like the most measly of jobs. Kettle's like, hey man, can you do me a solid and watch over these two Baccas and make sure, they don't get in a fight or something or a brawl? Cool, thanks. I do think I like Pater's character a lot. I like Pater. I don't know if he's blind or if if it's like an anime thing where a character's eyes are closed all the time, because his eyes are always closed. So, but obviously he can see. So maybe it's just like an anime thing where they keep their eyes closed, even though they're not blind. And I like that Einar is so skeptical in this scene. He tells Thorfinn lots of things like, hey, your wounds aren't that bad. They'll be able to heal. Silence. He's like, here's the shirt that I have. Since your other one was full of holes and bloody, you can have it. Nothing. And Einar's like, what, were you raised in a ditch? It's like, well, kind of. And he's like, you say thank you, sir. Like, he tries to teach Thorfinn manners. And it's kind of funny. But what's interesting is Pater says that they wouldn't actually kill them. He's like, oh, they wouldn't have actually killed you. And Einar's like, yeah, they would have. So Pater has a lot of belief. Now, the thing of it is, I think where Pater is coming from is that Olmar would not have actually killed them. Because I don't think Olmar would have. No, I think he would have backed down and backed away at the last moment. What's interesting is Fox and Badger and them that were the hired bodyguards. Yeah, I could have seen them killing Thorfinn. Maybe. Or making it to where he was incapacitated. Maybe. But then again, maybe they wouldn't have killed him. But at that point, it's like, is it physically killing or is it like killing their spirits, right? Because if they'd just been cut to pieces and spat on and stuff, maybe you're physically not dead, but spiritually, mentally, maybe they were trying to break them in that regard, even if they weren't going to like physically hurt them. Because Einar is pretty dang sure that they were. And then that's when Thorfinn, because Einar's like, those guys think we're just worthless as insects. And Thorfinn, who's been around the block, is like, well, we couldn't help it. We couldn't defend ourselves. But that's interesting too, because there's a part of me, Thorfinn says we couldn't help it. And a part of me feels like Thorfinn is lumping himself in with Einar out of respect for Einar, because I think Thorfinn could have defended himself. I think if he'd been trying to, he could have defended himself. He could have helped it. But a part of me wonders if maybe he took the brunt of it for Einar's sake, because he knows Einar couldn't have defended himself. Einar probably would have died if he fought those guys. Thorfinn wouldn't have. But Thorfinn, knowing that about him, decided to take the fall for Einar and let him go back to work. And he knew that he was strong enough to handle it. So when Thorfinn says this to him, like, either way, we couldn't help it, I feel like he's trying to pacify and make Einar not feel alone in that moment, because Thorfinn could have helped it. But he decided not to for Einar's sake. So that's interesting. Even if Thorfinn doesn't realize it, that's interesting. He says that the strong kill the weak. But I'm like, Thorfinn, you're not weak. So, and again, we get them close up. So that mouth, it's only natural. And that's such that's such an absolute thing to say, the strong kill the weak, it's only natural, because Einar doesn't exactly follow that same philosophy. So it's curious. That's why he gets mad in that moment, because he's heard it before. And he's more worried about owing Pater for the medicine. And Pater's like, no, it's my responsibility. It's fine. And then he says, you better thank Arnheid, because she came looking for me. And I'm like, oh my God, Einar he's so smitten, right? He's so smitten. Like when he looks at her and she's just like, she looks like the Madonna. She looks like a patron saint. Like, oh my God, Einar. Einar is he's so funny in that moment. I want to get a picture of that too. Bless his heart. Like, I'm rooting for you, bud. I'm rooting for you. But yeah, then he tells Thorfinn that he should say thank you. Do you have anything to say to Pater? And Thorfinn doesn't know. It's so easy to forget that even though Thorfinn's an adult and he's gotten older year-wise and his body has matured, like socially and emotionally, he's still stuck in that same rut that he was growing up his entire life. Like, he's still like 6-year-old Thorfinn that's had to mature without any guidance or, emotional maturity, right? He's just been stuck in this phase of violence in this cycle his whole life. And God, the introduction of the hedgehog. It's a Neon Genesis reference, right? If you've not seen Neon Genesis Evangelion, a big thematic element of that series, without spoiling anything, is a thing called the hedgehog's dilemma, which is essentially that hedgehogs, they have trouble with people getting close to them because they have all these spines and quills, and when you get close, you get pricked. They're prickly, and it's hard to get close and touch them, right? That's the hedgehog's dilemma. And it's a metaphor for how humans can be hard to communicate with one another because we put up barriers around us to try to keep ourselves safe. And the consequences of that is that we never get close to someone truly because of it. And that is Thorfinn to a T. He doesn't want anybody to get close to him. He doesn't know how to handle it. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to communicate to them. He's been our feral little wild child this entire series, and now he's a grown-ass man, and he still doesn't have the social skills to handle that. And Einar is just like trying to break through those barriers, which is so interesting to see. And Pater kind of just brushes it off. Pater's like, oh, well, Thorfinn's just a quiet guy. He just doesn't say much. It's fine. And I'm like, yes, that may be too. I also still can't get over how even though Thorfinn is a grown-ass man, he is still so small. He's just a short guy. Or Einar's a big dude, one or the other. I just thought Pater's like, get out of here, you weirdos. Go on back. And then Thorfinn's like, I'm going back to work. Einar had some great expressions this episode. Einar just looks done with Thorfinn, like, you're not going to talk. You don't know how to say thank you. You don't know how to say sorry. What can you do, Thorfinn? And Thorfinn's like, well, he has a very select set of skills. And he goes back to just chopping the trees down. And Einar is realizing that, wisely so, Thorfinn is not just a random nobody. Thorfinn is somebody that has seen some things. And Thorfinn's like, yeah, I've been to war. I've seen stuff. It's only natural, right? So that's fascinating to me that Thorfinn's like, yeah, I've seen some things. Just so you know, I've been to war. And Thorfinn doesn't lie. That's the thing, too. Einar asks him these questions that I was wondering how honest Thorfinn would be. And he's very honest. He's like, have you killed people? Yep. Been to war? Yep. How many people have you killed? And I was like, well, do we really have a number? And then Thorfinn says, honestly, I don't remember. I don't know how many people I've killed. I can't answer that question. And I love the metaphor of him as a child skirting through the woods, right? And then Einar looks down and sees the same, the broken twigs and sticks. And that one little panel of the broken twigs and stuff, they're like from, my family calls them junk trees. They're just like little trees. They don't really serve it's funny. That's a really funny metaphor because there's like the little twigs and tree branches that are on the ground there scattered that Einar focuses on, the sunlight hits in that one panel. My family calls them junk trees. I'm sure they have a legit name, but we call them that because they really don't serve a purpose. They're just there. They take up space. And if we clear out like a brush or a briar, they're like the first things to go because they don't provide like any fruit. They don't do anything. They barely have any leaves. They're just there. But what's interesting about that is by Thorfinn's logic of the strong kill the weak, and that's just the way things are, then it could be like the Danes viewing the rest of England as the junk trees, that we just got to clear them out of the way to make room for the bigger, stronger, more important trees that serve more of a purpose. And for Einar, those junk trees represent his family. So naturally, he's not happy about that situation or that line of thinking, right? And it just seems like he's learning more about Thorfinn in this moment. And Thorfinn talks about being on the battlefield. Mappa did a great job of animating young Thorfinn. I thought that like little 6 to 8-year-old Thorfinn from like episode 4 through 6, like that was from season 1. I thought they did a good job of reanimating that, right? And then Thorfinn saying, I was a warrior. Do you hate me now, Einar? Because yeah, him admitting he's like, I was what the Danes called warriors. And I killed people, probably people similar to your family. Do you hate me for it? Because he's in Thorfinn's mind, he probably thinks that he should. Because he's like, do you feel any sympathy towards me at all? Or what? And Einar is so conflicted. Because yeah, it's just the idea that this man he's been getting to know these last several months is probably someone that killed families like his own. I give this show so much credit because it went there. There was so many parts of me was like, oh, he's not going to strangle Thorfinn. He's not actually going to strangle him. He's going to stop like right away. No, he strangles him for a good while. Like, to the point of waking him up and like legitimately choking him. He does. And the crazy thing is that Thorfinn doesn't remember, right? But we go back to the flashback of Einar seeing the Danes lighting fires in their forest and like killing his father and killing his family. And he thinks back of his mother dying and everything. And they don't shy away from making him look dark. Like making our sweet teddy bear Einar look freaking scary, because then we see like the close-up of like him getting choked when his mother and his sister died, and like all like the veins and everything. It's so good. But just him in that darkness and him choking him. And I love the idea of the killer and Einar's face overlapping, right? Of Einar realizing that he's doing the same thing that his killers were doing, the strong killing the weak. And that it's only part of nature if you accept that ideology. And for a moment, it's like Einar is accepting it, being like, okay, Thorfinn, you said the strong kill the weak. Well, if I kill you, am I stronger than you? But then what does that do? Right? What do I do with this? And Thorfinn doesn't resist him at first. And Thorfinn doesn't even know he's getting choked. He's just thinking of running through the forest, right? And again, if you want to go full on relate to Attack on Titan, you could do like the whole children in the forest metaphor, and you could run with that, and that applies to Thorfinn in this instance. You could apply that to the whole first season with Thorfinn if you wanted to. But I do like the idea that in Thorfinn's mind, all of the men that were tracking him down as a kid, all of the men, they're shown as like soldiers. Now, it doesn't become clear whether they're Danish or they're English. It's just the idea that he's always been cornered like a dog and in the middle of a fire with nowhere to go, and he's cornered. And it's a metaphor that his only way out, his only way to survive, has been to push through and destroy everything in his wake. Like, that's this whole dream sequence, is this metaphor for how Thorfinn has been able to survive all this time. And that is by just destroying everything that stands in his way. Because that's been the only option, because they won't let him live otherwise. Right? And just the idea that they had these like demonic voices and you can barely see the outlines of them and all of that. It's such a grisly, an interesting grisly portrayal that makes sense for Thorfinn as a kid and how he saw all of these forces coming at him. But the thing is that he kept killing and he kept pushing his way through because that was the only way he could survive as Einar is choking him. But then, as he cuts, and I love that shot of him like cutting through and the blood on his face. And then we see that it's a woman. That it's this woman, right? And the woman is the one he stabs in the throat. And then she just burns up like the others. So it's this realization that he kept destroying and destroying and destroying, not realizing, and blinded by this rage and this violence, that only then did he realize the people he were killing were these innocent people as well. And then we see that toll that it's taken on him mentally. And that's what causes the... So now we have the idea of what the night terrors are. The night terrors that he's having aren't of him just killing. It's specifically of he's killing his enemies and then his enemies become the innocent. And the innocent that he knew growing up, the innocents like his mother and sister, and that brings him out of it and makes him start screaming. Right? And then we get that shot from the ED, right? As he reaches up to grab, and Einar at this point had gave up on choking him. Right? He gave up. Yep. And just kept screaming. And he's just reaching, like in the OP, reaching around, and he grabs Einar's shirt and has those night terrors. And I had an uncle who had night terrors, and to be honest, they are very freaky like this. And you're not supposed to wake them up. You're not supposed to interrupt them because it can do some stuff, but he used to have night terrors as well. So this is quite relatable. And then Einar just can't take it anymore. And I love that Thorfinn... Einar's expressions this whole episode are so damn good! They're just so good! They're so good! And they just portray like the inner turmoil in Einar, that he's just too nice of a guy. He can't follow through with it. He doesn't want to perpetuate the cycle, right? But in that moment, when he came behind Thorfinn to choke him, I instantly thought back to Askeladd being like, if you want to, now's your chance. If you want to, I'm asleep. You could do it while I'm asleep. And the funny thing is, I was expecting Thorfinn to be awake and to know Einar was coming at him, but he didn't. If Einar had wanted to, he could have killed Thorfinn, and he wouldn't have known. But he chooses not to. He makes the same choice that Thorfinn made. He chooses not to. And then the idea that he keeps reaching up, and then he wakes up. That face when Thorfinn wakes up, and it's Einar that's grabbed his hand. Oh, God, that's so good. So good. Yeah. And then Einar's just like, okay. And I will never get over Einar's conflicted face. It's so heartbreaking and it's so good. And Thorfinn telling him, because Thorfinn looks so soft in this scene once he wakes up. He looks so soft where he's just looking at Einar like, hey, why do you keep waking me up? Why do you wake me up every time I cry in my sleep? So then the question is this the first time that Einar's tried to kill him in his sleep? I thought it was. But the fact that he wakes him up every time he cries in his sleep maybe alludes to the fact that this is not the first time he's had those thoughts. But I think this is the first time he's had them because he just now figured out who Thorfinn was. So I think that that's the case. But that also suggests that he's woken up in his sleep before because he's concerned about him. So there's that concern, that realization of who he is, and then it ties back to him still being concerned regardless, right? And Einar just doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to admit that he also doesn't want to tell me, like, I nearly killed you back there, bro. And Thorfinn is surprisingly reflective in this moment. He's like, I've killed people. I've killed a lot of people. And he says they were probably, he's like, from battle to battle, I've attacked villages and killed a lot of people. He's like, I'm no different from the people that killed your family. He's like, I'm the same as them. I was complicit in it just like they are. He's like, I don't deserve. He basically says, I don't deserve to have your friendship. I don't deserve to have anything from you because I'm a monster like the people you despise. And Einar, because he's a big teddy bear, because he can't take it, he like gets us all frustrated because he can't stand it. He's like, you're not the same as them, damn it. I love when he gets all like worked up. And that look he gives Thorfinn, like Thorfinn's just looking at him like, what? Thorfinn just has that look on his face and it zooms in on him like, what? Like in that moment, he doesn't look like a warrior or a murderer or something evil like Einar has been portraying the people that killed his family. He looks like a young man that's just lost and doesn't know why he's alive. And Einar just gets so mad about it because he can't stand it. He's like, does anything good come from being alive? And then he thinks back to what Thorfinn's saying about nothing good's ever happened to me in my entire life. And now he understands what Thorfinn meant by that, because he's basically knows that Thorfinn feels remorse for all the bad things that have happened that he's caused or has experienced. And so he just doesn't have faith in life anymore. And I love the way that they animated it. When they went back to it, the green tones that they gave for Thorfinn, like that was so well done. Like Mappa, the animation in this episode was on point. Like it was very, very good. I was really happy with the animation in this. But Einar, he finally has enough, right? He finally has enough and says, nope. He's like, listen here, you whippersnapper. Where he's like, look. And you have Thorfinn, who's like got his little jagged teeth and his missing piece of ear. He says, do you want to die? I love that he asks him this sincerely. Einar's like, do you want me to kill you now? Because I was about to. But then I thought I was going to let you live. But if you want to die, you want me to kill you now? Like, what do you want me to do? He says, I don't. And I love that Einar basically, he goes over what Askeladd told him. He just rephrases it from an outsider's perspective, right? Because Askeladd Askeladd said stuff that was very similar to Thorfinn, but it kind of rings hollow when the person who says those things to you is the murderer of your father, essentially. So it's kind of hard to, it's hard to feel. It's hard in that moment to really know that Thorfinn couldn't connect to Askeladd because the person giving him this advice was someone he genuinely hated and wanted revenge on. Einar is not Askeladd. He's not that person. So when Einar says it, it rings differently because he's like, I don't know what terrible fate you've suffered, which is akin to what Askeladd has said to him in the past, even though Askeladd did know what kind of fate he suffered. He's like, I don't want to know what kind of hell you've lived through either, but we're able to chit-chat, eat shit, and sleep in this hell. And what I thought he was getting at when it flashes back to his family, what I thought he was getting at is the idea that he's like, we're able to do all these things and live through this hell like my family and I did. Because he'd established with his mom that, yeah, things were peaceful in that village, but they'd been through hell together and they'd survived it. So they had each other, right? And so that's where I thought he was heading with it, with the conversation. But instead he says, we're able to do all this stuff together because I love it, because someone kept us alive. And Mappa doesn't shy away from making like them look really emotional and over-exaggerated in this moment animation-wise because, yeah, Einar's kind of beat around the bush himself, being like, he's been, we talked about what people are a slave of, and he's basically been saying this whole time, like, he's like, why am I here? What am I doing? Why am I putting up with being a slave? Like, why am I giving up? What am I doing? But the reality is Einar's realized, he's like, no, my family died so that I could live and keep going. My mother told me to run and keep living. So that's what I'm doing. And he's like, you're in the same boat. Clearly, he's like, I don't know what you've experienced too, because you've experienced probably a lot more than me, but someone kept you alive or helped you to stay alive up until this point. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So are you wanting to keep alive or not? Or are you giving up? Are you giving up or not? How can you say nothing good has ever happened to you? Because, yeah, he's like, how can you say nothing good's ever happened to you? You're here. You're alive. You're not the dead. You're not the ones that were burnt in those villages that you raided. You're not the ones who've been killed like my father. So don't say nothing good's ever happened to you because you're still living. You're still here because someone cared enough about you to give their life for you. It's so good. And then, yeah, I'm just leaving Thor. And in that moment, Thorfinn looks like so innocent. Like the animation on him, he's just so pitiful. He's like, oh. And he says, you're wrong. He's like, you're wrong. And that could refer to asshole. I love that he adds that because he's like, yeah. He's like, it's not just that it's natural for the weak to die and the strong to live. He's like, no. He's like, I'm still here. And Einar believes that he's weak. So he knows that that's a lie. So good. Like, I was getting choked up in this episode. I was getting choked up because it's so good. And he says, don't act so spoiled. Like, you get to be arrogant and walk around making yourself be the biggest pity party. He's like, no, quit being like that. And then I like how they just sit there with that pole in between them, like with the 10 feet apart. And he's all like hunched up and mad and frustrated. And then Thorfinn finally speaking up after like that long pause. Like he's contemplating this whole time and thinking about what to say. And then Einar says, besides, it's not like you killed my family. So he's like, at the end of the day, he's like, I can't be mad at you, Thorfinn, because he's like, you didn't kill my family. It's like, you're not my personal grudge to bear. He's like, yeah, you're not any different than half the other people fighting, so... And he just kind of slumps over. But what got me, he's like, don't be so arrogant thinking it's all about you. That's everything Thorfinn needed to hear. Everything Thorfinn needed to hear, that at one point, I feel like somebody in season 1 has tried to tell Thorfinn, but it couldn't get to him because it was either coming from someone that had legitimately killed his family. And that's the thing too. It's like, Einar can't be mad at Thorfinn because he's like, well, you didn't kill my family, so I can't take it personally. But Thorfinn could never be that way around Askeladd because Askeladd was, in fact, involved in his dad's death. So he was a factor that killed his family. So Thorfinn was never able to get to that level with Askeladd like I feel he can get to with Snake and Einar because of that removal, that separation from his past. But what emotionally got me, and as soon as it started happening, I was like, nope, I'm done, is when Thorfinn says thank you. Because this whole episode, like back to Pater, he didn't know how to say thank you for someone giving him something. And then he thanks Einar for giving him a reason to live. And Einar's eyes shining. I'm like, shut up. He says, thank you for waking me. And that's so metaphor. It's like a metaphor, but it's also real, because he's saying thank you for waking me when I was crying out. Thank you for waking me when I was in my nightmares. So thanks for that. But also spiritually, emotionally, metaphorically, thank you for waking me up out of this depression and dread to realize that I need to move forward and maybe live for something. I love it so much. I love it. And he says he's sorry too. And it's like that moment with the close-up of Einar's eye, every like emotion drains. Like all that tension and anger just, it's like a big exhale. He's like, fine. Fine. It's a good thing you're cute, Thorfinn. And then that's it. And he's like, geez. He's like, I would like to sleep if you would shut up. And Thorfinn's like the only time Thorfinn really talks is when Einar's trying to sleep. It's great. And then he says, I see, I'm sorry. And then these two bros sleeping facing away from each other. I'm waiting for them to face each other and sleep. I'm waiting for that moment to happen, right? Yeah, and then we have the guy standing at the graveyard, right? At all the graves. Now, is he is he at Askeladd's grave? Did Askeladd get a grave? Where are we at? Where we see like the rocks and everything and all the different crosses, but I'm like, who's buried here? What's going on? And we get a shot of Aster's face, right? His hair, he's the only one that has that bowl cut with dim. You see, it's hard to tell because his like Amish bangs are pulled back by that band, right? But that's definitely Aster, isn't it? I feel like it is. I could be wrong. But yeah. Oh, this episode was absolutely wonderful, and I loved it so much. Do I still ship Thorfinn and Einar? Honestly, that entire conversation in the hay barn, it was 2 steps from being a BL. It was 2 steps away, friends. 2 steps. It was 2 steps away from it. And if somebody ever, here is my scavenger hunt for you all. If anybody's watching this video, if someone made a fanfic out of this scene, I can't look up Vinland Saga fanfiction because I'll be spoiled. I can't look up Vinland Saga fanfiction. I've not looked up any. I can't look up any because otherwise I'm afraid I'll see manga spoilers or something else, like in a tagline or in the tags or whatever. But if you all manage to find an AO3 fic of this scene with the unedited version, and you just feel ever so inclined to slide it my way in the Discord or slide it my way in the comments, brownie points to you all. So I can't have brownies, so you'll get all of them. So I just know someone's wrote a fan fiction about this. I know they have. I know they've wrote an extended scene of this. It's too good. It's too close. So close. You can taste it, but I'll be nice. And I won't elaborate anymore, but yeah, I still ship them. I can multi-ship. I can ship Einar with Arnheid and with Thorfinn. I find no problems with that. He is our bisexual king after all. So, I was a little surprised we didn't get that much with Snake in this episode. I'm surprised we didn't get so much with him, but I'm honestly okay with that because I feel like we're going to see more of his character, hopefully. But yeah, this was a great episode. I loved this episode, and it is the connecting episode to getting Thorfinn back on his feet, and hopefully with this development to advance the plot. I feel like these first 4 episodes, you needed to have them to establish emotionally where our characters are at before we move forward, because they've been through a lot. You can't just switch gears all of a sudden without, any emotional repercussions. So now we just gotta see where it goes and find out from there. So I'm so excited, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. It was a lot of fun, but I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. So in the meantime, thank you, before I end, thank you to patrons, Edgar and Larry Manning. Thank you guys so much. You guys are in the philanthropy tier on Patreon, which is the $10 tier that gives me some extra support for the month and also gives them a shout out onto Patreon and on YouTube videos, as well as if we have a tie in the polls, they are our tiebreakers. So fun times. But so yeah, thank you all so much. I really appreciate the support. And in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yes, I'll be back next week with episode 5 of season 2 of Vinland Saga. Bye.